Hi everyone, welcome to Deep Geek Live. Today we are carrying on with our series of videos, live streams, looking at the different regions of Westeros. Now we've worked our way through almost all of the continent, and we have now reached the Crown Lands. So this is a small area just around King's Landing and the islands just off of it, places like Dragonstone. So that's what we're going to be looking at today. As always, I'm framing this around questions that I've got from my patrons, and it's broadly going to be in three chunks of questions. The first set about Dragonstone, the second lot about King's Landing, and then I've got quite a few questions that I either didn't pick up previously or I on last week or a week or two ago, I said I just wanted to go away. Things that came up in the chat, I just wanted to go away, have a think about something, and then give you a fuller reply later. So I've got a couple of those coming up as well. But welcome if this is your first time watching us live. Great to have you. Do drop whatever comments and questions you want into the chat. I'll try and pick up as many of them as I can going through. Quick thank yous just for some super chat, super stickers before we went on air. Ryan Larkin, thank you so much for the super sticker. The Lady Eternal, thank you. Mara Lee saying just a show of love and appreciation for the fabulous content, merch, and stories. Hugs to Dan, the gorgeous dog, who is again, he's gone upstairs again, far past his bedtime. And Dacro saying, do you think the Targaryen dragons would still be alive if they had kept them and the seat of power in Dragonstone? It seems to me it would have been easier and safer than confinement in King's Landing. So I think I'll start with that one. A really interesting question, whether the Targaryen reign and rule, and particularly the dragons, would have been better served staying on Dragonstone. Now, at a sort of a meta level, I think we should probably say it was probably a good idea for the capital to be on the mainland. This allowed people to be engaged in it from all parts of the Seven Kingdoms. It linked up really well by the road networks, and so King's Landing as a hub became the place that you could have the seat of the Faith of the Seven, for example. That could not have happened over on Dragonstone. So it made sense for Aegon to start off by placing his capital there, actually on the mainland, not just on Dragonstone. It also kind of showed, and this was something they were quite keen to do, the original Targaryens, it showed that they weren't just conquerors from overseas who were just going to do things their own way. They actually were wanting to embrace a degree of what was culturally the case in the Seven Kingdoms, by which I mean not that they themselves, the Targaryens, those of Valyrian descent, would sort of lower themselves to consider themselves to be of a level with the other people, but they had a sigil. As far as we know, the Valyrians didn't really deal with sigils. They created a sigil. They very much embraced the Faith of the Seven, managed to get so the first crowning of Aegon the First was down in Old Town, embracing the Faith of the Seven. They were very keen to do this, and this was part of this was getting the new capital established on the mainland. So it made sense to start with. Would they have survived better long-term keeping their base on Dragonstone? Possibly is the short answer. I think they would have lost a huge amount of buy-in from people, but they would definitely have managed to have a place that the dragons could thrive. They're trying to set up a place for the dragons in King's Landing was not a huge success. Now, I do have to just put a little asterisk by this. I am personally firmly of the conviction, I saw people were chatting about this in the chat before we went live actually, but personally I am firmly of the conviction that this idea that locking dragons up in the dragon pit, that's what caused the death of the dragons, I think that is a lie made up by the Maesters. Like all the best lies, there's an element of truth there. Dragons do not thrive when they're kept in captivity. But all of the evidence that we have is that dragons may not thrive, but they still survive and they grow. Dany's dragons in the Pyramid at Meereen, they didn't thrive, but they did grow and they did stay alive. And we get Morning, who grew whilst being in the dragon Morning, grew whilst being in the dragon pit. All the other dragons that were there, we didn't hear that they became sort of stunted in their growth in any way. It probably didn't help, but this is not what caused the death of the dragons. That is other things that I personally believe. I did a video on this relatively recently. It was the Maesters who killed the dragons, but following the Dance of the Dragons, because most of the dragons died in the Dance of the Dragons, and then it was a matter of poisoning the dragon egg. So that's my personal take. If you want a little bit more background on that, do please go and check out that video. I called it something like "Did the Maesters Kill All the Dragons?" So do go and check that out. But yeah, I think that was a really a fascinating question, Decro. Thank you very much for that. Anders Graham, thank you for the super chat, saying, what do you think Varys will do to make the small folk of King's Landing more ready and accepting of Fagon? I don't think he needs to do much, to be honest, because what will happen is that Cersei will do things to make herself unloved, and that is what is going to be the main driver for the love of Fagon. So if you have a ruler who is seen as being tyrannical in some way, clearly killing the small folk, and then you get somebody who is there who appears, as we've seen with Fagon, he does appear to be this embodiment of a perfect ruler. Whether he actually is or not is a completely different matter, but he does come across well. And that, I think, is what the issue is. It's not that Varys is going to be doing things secretly so much to make people love him. I think that he will start spreading the seeds of information that this is the Targaryen heir, come to bring the golden age back to King's Landing and all the rest of it. But it's the juxtaposition of Cersei against Fagon that will be the key point here. Sparkle Banner, thank you so much for the super chat, just saying, I love your channel. Thank you. Well, thank you very much. I really appreciate that. Brendan of House Stark, first of his name, thank you. Saying, you are my #1 A Song of Ice and Fire YouTuber. Thank you. I really appreciate that. How would Tyrion react to Tywin to be executed if he was sentenced to death for the sack of King's Landing and the death of Elia, Rhaenys, and Aegon? I assume this is way back in the day, because the point is that there is no moment in time in the story that we've been given where that, personally, I think is looking a likely possibility, because Tywin did what he did at the time in order to gain the support of King Robert, and he succeeded in that. It was a brutal, horrible thing for him to do, but he succeeded in that. And from that moment on, the Lannisters had power in King's Landing. So there was no point when Tywin would have been at threat of being held to account for those murders. Now, how would Tyrion have reacted theoretically to his father? I think this really depends on which point in the story. Tyrion, before the moment at which he kills his father, he realizes who he is and all the rest of it. Yes, he's not got a great relationship with his father, but he is very much part of Team Lannister. This is very clear. Rereading through Game of Thrones, Tyrion, yes, he's a great and interesting character, but he is still very much Team Lannister all the way through this. And so I think that he would have been sticking with the family right up until that point. After that, no. Obviously, his reaction would be completely different. Once he accepts inside himself who his father actually is, that's the moment at which he would happily have seen his father die, hence him happily killing his father. Prince of Quarkness, thank you, saying, hi, Robert, watching while prepping an RPG session. Excellent. What did the Valyrians use Dragonstone for pre-Doom? Seems a long way to come just to chill out. Yeah, so I'll link this one actually with a question from Robin Isama over on Patreon saying, hi, Robert, why did the Targaryens settle on Dragonstone, which is fairly barren, instead of somewhere around the Blackwater? Do you think there was something special, perhaps magical, that drew them there? And Howland's little sister also saying, I'll be sewing while watching your live stream. Excellent. I'm curious about a few facts regarding Dragonstone. As we're told about the Valyrians' westernmost outpost on the Isle, which would claim the name of Dragonstone, my question is one with little or no known facts. What would the Valyrians achieve by having a castle on this island? What made Aenar Targaryen decide to claim this castle as his before the Doom? There are no clear facts which provide answers, but I'd be extremely interested in your hypothesis. Okay, so let's do a little bit of background. The island that is Dragonstone is indeed rocky, relatively barren. It's a volcanic island. It's got all over it. There's just these sort of gaps where hot air, smelly steam comes out, sulfurous smoke comes out from under the ground. It's not a pleasant place. However, the Valyrians had been slowly spreading out westwards. The Valyrian freehold had been expanding out over Essos, and then where is next to go after that? Well, Westeros. They haven't invaded. There's no indications that they were thinking about invading Westeros. But what they were very keen on doing, and this comes down to the nub of why Dragonstone, was to secure the shipping lines that go through the Narrow Sea, and particularly the ones that head into Westeros. Now, King's Landing wasn't there at the time, but Duskendale definitely was there, was a very important port. Now, Dragonstone is the largest island there in the mouth of what's effectively the estuary there. It is guarding that entire area. And so that, along with the fact that you've got House Celtigar and House Velaryon on the other islands in that area, means that the Valyrians suddenly had this stranglehold and control over the Narrow Sea and all the trade that goes through there. So that is why they set it up a base on Dragonstone. Why did the Targaryens choose to go there? Well, we know about Daenerys the Dreamer and the vision about the Doom of Valyria and all the rest of it. Where would they go? Well, as far away from it as they possibly could. So they went to the westernmost point, away from where the Doom of Valyria was, somewhere that they could buy from the Valyrians, and they could just sort of set up home there. It's probably worth saying that although most people find it quite a dark, dull, and dreary place, dragons clearly like it. It's the volcanic activity seems to be a perfect place for dragons to be. So the Targaryens setting up shop there isn't, I think, a huge mystery. I think this is just the most sensible idea for them. They are going to move out from Valyria. Where are they going to go? There's this place that hasn't got a permanent owner, that is a long way from Valyria, and it's somewhere that the dragons could happily set up home. So that is why we're at there. And Prince of Quarkness, what did they use it for? An island fort. That's what it was. The Lady Eternal, picking this up from Nicola Jurican. I love it when people do this, picking up questions for others in the chat, saying, is it possible that a Maester suggested to Egg that he tried to hatch dragons at Summerhall? I mean, it's possible. We don't have huge amounts of information about Summerhall. So for those who don't know, the tragedy at Summerhall, this was where Aegon V, who was Egg from the Duncan Egg novellas, when he grew up and he became king, he became obsessed in his later life about hatching the dragon eggs. There were lots of dragon eggs that the Targaryens still had, and they weren't hatching. And he became obsessed with trying to hatch them. And then he got lots of knowledgeable people from all over the known world, and eventually decided to try doing something at Summerhall, which was effectively, it was the third of the Targaryens' main palaces after the Red Keep, Dragonstone. Summerhall was their third place. Now, might the Maesters have suggested it? I mean, my take is that the Maesters, and the more you dig into this, the more you find, if you actually start reading Fire and Blood, you find the shiftiest, most suspicious character in the entirety of Fire and Blood. A slight digression here, but the most suspicious character you will find is Archmaester or Grandmaster Munken. Now, he is a guy we don't talk about huge amounts, but he was the Grandmaester after the Dance of the Dragons, and even during it for a while, but the important point is afterwards. Now, afterwards, the king was Aegon III. Now, he was still a child. He was underage, and so the rulers of Westeros decided what they would do is they'd set up not just one regent just to oversee what through Aegon's childhood, but they had seven people who would be ruling in his stead. Now, one by one, these, over an incredibly short period of time, they started at 7. Within 2 years, 4 of them had either died or resigned. 2 more were appointed. Within another year or 2 of those 5 that remained, 3 more had resigned or died, until finally the only person left was Grandmaester Munken. And Grandmaester Munken was then ruling as the king, because that's what his role was. And he also had the role of Hand of the King. And there was no small council to speak of at the time. He was, for a period of around 6 months, the person in the 7 Kingdoms who had the most power out of anyone ever, pretty much. What did he do with it? Well, we read that he doesn't really want to talk about that time. He seems very reticent to talk about it. So something happened. George R. R. Martin's hinting that he did some things, he did some stuff, but we're just not going to read about it. And that was the period at which the dragon eggs stopped hatching healthy dragons. That was the exact period when that happened. So he is the most suspicious character. We already know the amount of power that the Maesters have is huge. They've got the knowledge to how to do these things. They are in every single important place, court across the land. They're in charge of the mail, so they can read everything that's going on. They understand the whole lot of it, and they were in the right position to be able to get rid of the dragons. There were, at the end of the Dance of the Dragons, 4 live dragons, 3 of which were effectively feral, and all, it appears, died. And the 4th, which was Morning, was a very, very young dragon. We don't know what happened yet. We don't know the fate of Morning, but Morning definitely died as well. And after that point, all the dragons, the dragon eggs did not hatch much, and the ones that did the dragons were born small and deformed and all the rest of it. So something happened there with the dragon eggs. Nothing at all to do with the whether or not they're in the in King's Landing. That some of them were in Dragonstone and many in other places. This was absolutely nothing to do with whether or not dragons are in captivity. This was the dragon eggs stopped hatching. Which was a huge digression, but to come back to the question, Lady Eternal, Nicola Jurican, is it possible the Maesters suggested that he should try to hatch eggs? It's possible, but I don't think that they really cared at that point. They knew that it wasn't going to work. They knew that no dragons were going to be hatched. So it didn't really make huge amounts of difference to them. Ariel Winchester, thank you so much for the super sticker saying thanks for being you. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. Paul Taylor, hello, Robert. Great show. Thank you. Why do you think Skagos is so overlooked? Well, we're moving away to all the way up to the east coast to another big island. Why is Skagos so overlooked, particularly from a Dragon Lord perspective, which is all about overlooking? Was Aegon never interested? So Skagos is an island off of the east coast of the north of Westeros. It's so far north, it's almost like some of it's northward of the wall. And it's got this long and slightly complicated history with the Seven Kingdoms and the Starks, is that technically they're part of the North, but the Starks have never really bothered trying to enforce that. There aren't huge amounts of people there. They don't, certainly to the Seven Kingdoms, most people there don't think of the Skagosi as being particularly civilized. So I think it's fair to say that the when you're asking whether Aegon was not interested, not really. Actually, this is the fact of the matter is that the North, although yes, the Torrhen Stark was the king who gave over the North to be part of the Seven Kingdoms, the king who knelt. The Targaryens didn't really bother that much with the North after that. We have these examples, and for those who've read Fire and Blood, they'll know that Jaehaerys and Alysanne went up there. Aegon himself did go up there, but not much, and not quickly. Most of the time, they spent their time around the southern parts of the Seven Kingdoms and left the north alone. So the fact that one of the most inhospitable parts of the bit of the Seven Kingdoms that the Targaryens cared about the least, that they didn't really bother with, for me, it's not at all surprising. There wasn't any particular economic or political advantage to taking it on. Reflective Rambling saying happy name day to Chrissy of Oldstones, early for Carla Way and Ygritte Weirwood, and first stream to J Machine Gun Martinez and Micah Massey. Well, there's a lot there, but Chrissy of Oldstones, moderator supreme, happy name day to you. You're wonderful. All of my moderators are wonderful, and if you are watching live in the chat, please do show the moderators some love. And Chrissy, I hope you're having a fantastic day. Also, Carla and Ygritte, who are here, regulars here, have wonderful birthdays, name days, the two of you as well. And J Machine Gun Martinez and Micah Massey, welcome. I hope you really enjoy watching this live. And thank you, Reflective Rambling, for picking up on all of that for me. Lance Waltrip saying, these live streams are my go-to listening while doing chores, and I never catch it live to show my appreciation. Keep being great, and thanks. Well, thank you. I really appreciate that. Thank you very much. And if I can make your chores go slightly more easily, then I am very happy. Right, is that me? Oh no, I've got another question in the chat. Ryan Lynch, keep up the good work. Unfortunately, I can't watch the rest live tonight. I'll catch up at the weekend when I'm brewing my next batch of mead. Wow, I love mead. It's a wonderful drink. And I I've tried to make it myself, not huge amounts of success, but I'm very jealous if you do make good mead. Think that's me caught up now. Yes, that's me caught up now in the chat. Questions. Let's go to some questions. We're focusing in on Dragonstone first. Let's go to some questions from some of my patrons. James F. Parham. So this is picking up actually on what I was saying just a moment ago, saying that eggs on Dragonstone stopped hatching. I like the idea that the Maesters had something to do with this, but I was wondering if you have any idea how that hypothesis informs the mystery of the Summerhall tragedy. Did whatever the Maesters do to the eggs lead to the tragedy? Okay, well, I will happily tie this all in together as best I can anyway. So we're not told this, so we have to read between the lines. But my take is that the Maesters, we know that they've got a book called The Death of Dragons that they're keeping under heavy lock and key. We know that they had the opportunity. We know that the dragons and magic are not part of their worldview and that they would proactively wish to try and stop them. And we know they had the opportunity and ability to do something to the dragon eggs after the Dance of the Dragons, when the Targaryens were scattered and not really, and importantly, the king at the time hated dragons. He didn't want any dragons or dragon eggs in King's Landing. This was an incredibly rare and important moment for the Maesters if they wanted to do something. So my general take is that the death of the dragons was not Maesters killing dragons. That's not what was going on. Maybe they had to get rid of one or two, but mostly it was poisoning the dragon eggs in some way. That is a lot easier way to get rid of the dragons, and that seems to have been what happened. The dragon eggs mostly did not hatch, and the ones that did the dragons that were born seemed very poorly, sickly. So that's what seems to have happened. Does this link in with the tragedy at Summerhall? Well, yes, to an extent, because what happened was that the dragon eggs were still there. So they didn't get rid of dragon eggs. The dragon eggs still existed, but they'd done the equivalent of putting a syringe into them and poisoned them in some way. Now, Aegon the Fifth wanted to hatch these dragon eggs. We're told, even many generations after the Dance of the Dragons and after the dragon eggs stopping hatching, the Targaryens still put dragon eggs in the cradles of their children, and so Egg had a dragon egg, and there were many others around and about. Now, he wanted to hatch them, and I suspect that actually he probably got it mostly right in terms of the magic. He consulted far and wide. He went all the way. He got people from Ashai. He got pyromancers. What we know of how to hatch a dragon egg, or certainly the way that Dany did it, was this kind of everything happened at exactly the right moment in time. There was fire, there was sacrifice, so fire and blood, there was the red comet, there was some intentionality about it. Everything was exactly right. George R. R. Martin has been very clear that was a one-off event. But in terms of hatching them, fire and blood, it did happen. There was huge amounts of fire. We know that there was this great conflagration that happened at Summerhall. It killed so many people. There was fire. There was death. There was sacrifice of important people. Egg himself died. His son, who had been heir beforehand, died. Dunk himself died. These are important people. This, if you're looking at King's blood was spilt. So what I think happened with the Maesters there was that they were happy for this to go on, because this was going to prove once and for all that dragon eggs could not hatch, because they know that they'd poisoned these dragon eggs and the dragon eggs weren't going to hatch. What did happen, though, was that thematically, symbolically, a dragon was hatched. The magic did work, although not in a way that anyone thinks, because Rhaegar was born at Summerhall. When there was all of this magic happening, when there was the fire, when there was the blood, when there was the sacrifice, that was when Rhaegar was born. So symbolically, what happened was that, not intentionally, the dragon was reborn at that point. Now, just as a pure aside here, just as we're going on dragon eggs, one thing which I think adds to all of this is the fact that Dany's 3 eggs, how did they hatch if the Maesters poisoned all the eggs? Well, we're pretty sure that the 3 eggs that Dany got were actually the ones that Alyssa Farman stole many years earlier from Dragonstone, pardon me, and then sold to the Sea Lord of Braavos. These were beyond the reach of the Maesters, the only 3 dragon eggs that were beyond the reach of the Maesters. So the only 3 dragon eggs that Dany got were the 3 dragon eggs that Dany got were the only 3 ones that the Maesters had not been able to poison. It all adds up, in my mind at least. It's one of those things where George R. R. Martin hasn't told us this, but we can pick out the little lines that inform us of what was most likely going on. Catherine Kunko saying, just a show of support. Thanks for all of your great content, Robert. Thank you so much, Catherine. I really appreciate that. Okay, question from Ariel Winchester. Saying, hey Robert, I hope all is well. With Dragonstone technically belonging to the Iron Bank, since Stannis put it up as collateral, how do you think it will work out when Daenerys arrives? I believe she will land there before anywhere else. Also, how will she handle the people that are currently on Dragonstone? Will she give them a chance to bend the knee before fighting them? Well, so a few questions there. Firstly, just on the technical thing about the Dragonstone, does Dragonstone belong to the Iron Bank? Now, I think this was a show thing, and I don't think they actually explicitly said it in the show either, but the clear implication was that there had to be some sort of collateral for the loan that Stannis got. Now, in the books, the loan that Stannis got, he's only signed in one of the pre-release chapters from the Winds of Winter. And there I had a very quick check just before we went on air. We don't see that he explicitly offers anything up as collateral. What he does explicitly do is take on the crown debt, which is the debt that King Joffrey had, for example, what was inherited previously from Robert Baratheon. So that is what he has taken on rather than any sort of collateral. But in terms of Daenerys, yes, I think that for me, it makes the most kind of thematic sense for her and strategic sense for her when she arrives to land at Dragonstone. That's where she left to start with as a young baby, and that as her arrival point back to Westeros, it kind of works as a story. So I think that's right. Will she give the people there a chance to bend the knee? Absolutely. I think she will. I think that she will echo as much as she can Aegon the Conqueror. And Aegon the Conqueror's approach was, if you bend the knee, then great. if not, then I will kill you. That was his approach. And I think that will be Daenerys' approach. She is, in her mind, going to be very fair-minded about that. I think George R. R. Martin is going to allow us to come to our own decision about quite how fair-minded that approach is. But yeah, I think she will echo Aegon's way of doing things. Question from Kai Johnson saying, greetings. Is there a possibility that there may be a cache of dragon eggs that may have been forgotten about deep within the caves on Dragonstone? Or would these serve little to no purpose to the current plot of A Song of Ice and Fire? Lady Eternal also saying, I seem to remember hearing a theory some time ago that the severity of Loras Tyrell's injuries during the taking of Dragonstone had been exaggerated for Cersei's benefit, a cover that allowed him to remain on Dragonstone in search of the legendary cache of dragon eggs that remained hidden there. Do you see any evidence of this? And if so, what would be the benefit to the Tyrells of searching for dragon eggs? Would they be gifts to offer to Dany or Fagon, or what? So, might there be dragon eggs somewhere on Dragonstone? There might. My general feeling is that Stannis had been there for a long time, and so he wasn't a fool by any stretch of the imagination. He will have been very aware of the value of dragon eggs. And so if there were any dragon eggs still left on there, probably he would have found them. And if he had found them, he probably would have taken them with him. So I don't personally see that it's looking likely that there are dragon eggs there. There might be. It's an island with lots of caves and lots of mysteries, so maybe there are some hidden there. But what benefit would this be to the story? My general take is that these would be probably, unless they were really, really hidden, probably poisoned ones, so they wouldn't hatch, so they don't add anything to this story. But as you say, they could be, Lady Eternal, they could be used as gifts to Fagon or Daenerys. So was Loras faking injuries? I think he probably was badly injured, and I think he was probably staying there to recuperate. The amount of times we're told, just looking back at it, the amount of times we're told about Loras's injuries and how close he is to death, there's something going on. But what would happen if the Tyrells found some dragon eggs? Yes, they could certainly give them as tribute to whoever they wish. And I think the Tyrells probably first would be wanting to side with Fagon, because if Cersei kills Marjorie, as I suspect she probably will, then they will turn on the Lannisters, and Fagon is on the doorstep. Dany is still months and months and months away. Fagon is on the doorstep, and they would probably come onto his side. So yes, they could do that. But Loras, if he stays on Dragonstone, then I think that Fagon, although he may want to claim Dragonstone at some point, I think it's probably likely that Loras will stay there until Dany arrives. I think the short version is these dragon eggs aren't going to play a huge role in it. We're not suddenly going to get new dragons coming. These are, if they even exist, then they're just the equivalent of big jewels that look pretty and can be used to bribe or buy things. So that's what's going on there. Joanne Evans saying, thank you, Robert, for your streams. Keep me going as I await back surgery. You're the best. All the best for your back surgery. I hope that that all goes very well. And also Glenn Thrasher, thank you for the super sticker, saying thanks for being you. Thank you, Glenn. I really appreciate that. Now, question from Peter. I remember George R. R. Martin being specific about the appearance of certain aspects of Dragonstone, specifically the stone dragons. Will the stone dragons, not the eggs, come to life? Yeah, so this was one of the things that the TV show, I mean, I think visually the TV show did brilliantly on many levels. But Dragonstone, they didn't really do it full justice, in my view. Dragonstone as a castle is it's molded in the shape of dragons. There are dragons everywhere. The crenellations on the top of walls are dragons, some and other mythical beasts. The archways are shaped to look like stone tails of dragons. There are dragon wings stretched out into the sky. You get the chimneys are like the dragon's mouth breathing out the smoke and the flame. This is the whole idea is that this should look and feel and have the whole sense of being dragons everywhere. The castle is a living, breathing dragon, is the feel to it. Now, Melisandre, when she came over to Westeros seeking Azor Ahai Reborn, she obviously had this prophecy that the stone dragon shall come to life and thought, Dragonstone. So that is where I will find Azor Ahai Reborn. Now, I would humbly suggest that we shouldn't take Melisandre's interpretation of much with any great seriousness. She seems to be very, very good at getting the right information and then misinterpreting it. So, yes, there is the prophecy about stone dragons coming to life. But I think that doesn't refer to what's happening or what might potentially happen on Dragonstone. I don't think that the stone dragons on Dragonstone will come to life, but we have got stone eggs which give birth to dragons, with Dany and the birth of the dragons there. So that is one way of fulfillment of this prophecy. Also, incidentally, if you look over at Winterfell, which also has these gargoyles and also has lots of statues of giant statues down in the crypts. I personally think, you can check out my videos on this, I'm not going to go through all of the chain reasoning that gets you there, but the Jon Snow, I believe, will blow the horn of winter and breathe life into these statues, therefore bringing life to these stone statues, again, in a way echoing this prophecy. So the two main characters who have some sort of claim to be Azor Ahai Reborn, because it's not Stannis, obviously, Dany and Jon both could or their apologists anyway, could point at things that may meet that prophecy. So that, I think, is what's going on, not the literal stone dragons on Dragonstone. AK Channel TV saying, with the amount of hidden escapes in the Red Keep, why didn't Aerys try to leave? Why didn't the other Targaryen children try to escape through them? Well, it's an entirely fair question. Why didn't the Aerys leave? Well, I don't think that he was in his right mind at the time, is the short answer. I think that he seemed to have gotten to the point of wanting to burn the entire city down. And that was what it was. He wasn't thinking about surviving. He was thinking about burning the entire city down. So that's why he wasn't there. And he wasn't wanting the Targaryen, this is Elia's children, they were effectively being held hostage by him in King's Landing. That was what was going on with them. And so, no, he wasn't wanting them to be surviving. And it's probably fair to say that the Lannister attack came as a surprise. So they were let in to King's Landing because Tywin said, hey, I'm on your side. And then Pycelle advised that, yeah, you should let him in, you should trust him. And so they came in. The main forces, the main Lannister forces sort of went around King's Landing and pillaging and doing all kind of horrific things there. But the people who actually murdered Elia and her children just made a beeline straight for the Red Keep and went and did it. So this was a surprise, the Lannisters turning coat. So that's why not. Yes, they could have escaped, but they just didn't. Turbo Question saying, who is the liege lord of the Crownlands? The king? Question mark. Yes, I think I've got a question on this later, but happy to pick up on this now. The Crownlands are one of the 9 regions of the 7 kingdoms. But unlike most of the others, they are not. They don't have this history of being a kingdom. So whereas the north was the kingdom of the Starks, and you had the Westlands, which is the kingdom that the Lannisters ruled, the Kings of the Rock, and so on, the Crownlands weren't. They were effectively an area of disputed land that sometimes the Storm Kings down in the Stormlands had control of. Sometimes it was whoever was the power of the time in the Riverlands. Other times others came in and claimed them and had their own small petty kingdoms. So what happened was that when Aegon came in, establishing the 7 kingdoms, this area didn't have a natural ruler. So he established, and it didn't have King's Landing at the time. So he established King's Landing and basically said, okay, well, this area around here, plus the islands that obviously weren't part of the 7 kingdoms before, because they were Dragonstone and Driftmark and places. These were Valyrian islands. All of that area, this is just coming direct control of the crown. This is all directly owned and controlled by the crown, and so that was what it was. They are the crown lands, as opposed to being under the protection and leadership of whoever had, which noble family had previously been ruling that area. Sweet Melissa, thank you very much, saying, thanks for keeping my mind busy while I clean the kitchen. I was wondering your thoughts on the fate of King's Landing at the end. I wonder, the devastation will be awful. Will it still be the capital? Well, yes, the devastation will be terrible. I'm sure I will dig into this later on in this stream. We'll look at King's Landing in a bit more detail in a moment. But yes, I think that there will be plague ravaging through it. I think that there will be fire ravaging through it. I think that it will have been attacked and ruined several times over. Will it still be the capital? Georgia, I mean, it almost became a cliche, a couple of years ago when we were talking about season 8 and what was going to happen at the end of Game of Thrones. But George R. R. Martin was writing a story where, and still is writing a story within the books, where the Iron Throne, the whole point of this Game of Thrones that everyone was struggling over, that's not how it ends. It's not actually a matter of the story will end when we know who's going to end up on the Iron Throne. That's just like almost a throwaway bit at the end of it all, who actually ends up on the Iron Throne. And indeed, the Iron Throne itself on the show was melted. I suspect something similar will happen in the books. So will it still be the capital? I mean, the short answer is George R. R. Martin, I think, is not going to show us huge amounts about the future. The story will end. He'll give us a little bit. He'll give us hints and ends to the narrative arcs for the characters, but he's not going to be giving us this 20 years later chapter or a clear timeline of what happens afterwards. It's going to be left to us to work it out. I suspect that there's a good chance that King's Landing will have to be rebuilt, and that the new king will have to have a temporary home somewhere. Let's say Harrenhal. That's my general take of where we're going to be at. So, yes, it will be destroyed, but in the longer term, after all the story is gone, it is a good place for a city there, particularly given the road network and the sea access and all the rest of it. So it's a good place for a city, but it does need to be rebuilt from the bottom up. I'm always reminded of what Elena Tyrell says, that you can smell it before you see it. We're often in these kinds of stories where we're shown where the the rich and the 1% live, but for the vast majority of people living in King's Landing, and it's pretty grotty existence. Okay, question. Prince of Quarkness saying, compared to e.g. London, how did King's Landing grow so quickly in 300 years? And were the first few Targaryen kings ruling from a city under construction? Yes, they were definitely ruling from a city under construction. That was the way it was. The Red Keep was a project that was first imagined by Aegon, but to start with, there was what was called the Aegon Fort, which was what we would probably now think of as like a Motte and Bailey castle, a wooden castle. And then obviously around that, the moment he decided this was where he was going to set up his court, then obviously the courtiers had to arrive. They had to have an army, so they had to have a barracks. Once you get that, then you have to have inns, and you have to have everything that services that industry. And then you get things like the Great Sept being built, and that brings a huge amount of people. And the moment this becomes the hub of things, then people flock in there. King's Landing is a very clear echo of London, but everything George R. R. Martin writes in his fantasy stories is bigger, better, faster, and more. That's the way it is in this sort of magical world he has. And so, yes, of course, it can grow hugely. And I mean, I don't think that is too shocking a thing, that people migrate into it. And in 300 years, you can get quite a huge amount of population growth. If you just have a look incidentally at the population growth of our planet as a whole, you will just see that in the last 100 years, let alone 300 years, then the population of this planet has, I think, trebled, something like that. Population growth can happen very quickly if you have good food supplies, if you have a sort of health care of some kind, and that it can happen. So it's not a mystery, I don't think, and it is. And London itself is a huge, sprawling metropolis, and was even back in the day before it all burned down in the Great Fire of London. Okay, so question from Lady Eternal saying, George R. R. Martin has said in the past that there will be revelations about Dany's past and the House with the Red Door in future books. Do you think it's possible that she will be revealed to be a dragon seed from a family on Dragonstone rather than a pure-blood Targaryen? Her mother, Rhaella, had a history of stillbirths, miscarriages, and babies dying shortly after birth, and there are multiple baby swaps in the story already. So my take is no. I don't think George R. R. Martin has said that there will be a twist about her backstory. I think that's not something that he said. What he has said about the Red Door, there will be more details about the Red Door in the future. Now, so what might those details be? Well, this is psychologically a very important thing for Dany, because this represents home for her. This represents peace. This represents a good place for her to be. Because for those few years as a child, that was when she was happiest, that was when she was carefree. So that is what the House with the Red Door represents. Now, this was, I'm not going to go into all of the detail again on this one, but this was in Braavos. That's where it was. It was there almost certainly in the Sea Lord's Palace. There are lots of clues we've got that that's what's going on there. And we know that in Braavos, politics can change very quickly, and that makes absolute sense of why they suddenly had to move out, because the Sea Lord changed and the new Sea Lord did not wish to be harbouring the claimants to the throne of Westeros, of the Seven Kingdoms. So that all adds up. What kind of thing might we come back to? I think it has to be the and he had, and I think when he was saying that, this was prior to the Dance with Dragons, so the revelations that we get about this marriage pact with Dawn, I think that will be coming out a little bit more. And I think psychologically we have to understand where she feels home is, and although she might want to go back to Westeros, she has no memory of Westeros. Actually, for her, where home is not Westeros, it's Essos. So I think that's psychologically something that George R. R. Martin could well be coming back to, is that she hasn't really thought too much about where this is. She always thinks about her homeland being Westeros. When she gets to Westeros, she will almost certainly feel not at home there either, because that is not where she actually comes from. Yes, she was born there. Dragonstone is her home. That is where she will feel happiest, I personally think. Susan McNeely, thank you very much, saying picking up for Chelsea Oliver. Thank you. I love it when people do this. How could Fagon take to finding out that Jon possibly being his half brother? Could they team up together for the common purpose? I don't think that the timing will work for this personally. I think that Fagon will be gone before Jon finds out about who he is, and any kind of head of steam can be reached for him to be king. Now, I think that when Jon does discover this, he is not going to want to be king, even if people, and there will be people who try to put him on the throne, he will not want that. He's got a long history of this. He did not want to be the Lord Commander of the Night's Watch. He didn't put his name forward. That was Sam who did that. That was some electoral rigging going on there by Sam. Got him on to be Lord Commander. He rejected that. He did not want that. He was offered to be made Lord of Winterfell by Stannis. He didn't want that either. On the show, and I think that this will be largely echoed in the books, when Jon is hailed as King of the North, it's not that he claims it, it's just that he is acclaimed as it by all of the lords in the room. He has this track record of not actually wanting power, which in a way does make you think, well, perhaps he's a good person to have the power if he doesn't really want to have it. But I don't think that he will want it. So I don't think that he will team up with Fagon, even if the timing works out. But I don't think they would team up as sort of Targaryens against Daenerys or anything like that. Jon will, in the north, once he comes back, and once he is, and the Starks are coming back together at Winterfell, his aim will be, how do we destroy or face the threat of the others? And the biggest thing, there's a limited supply of Valyrian steel, so he has to get Dragonstone from somewhere, dragon glass from somewhere, and the place that he can get that from is Dragonstone. So whoever is in Dragonstone is immediately going to be the person he gets in contact with, and that, I think, is going to be Daenerys. So I think that his contact is going to be with her, but I think she will have dealt with Fagon before we get to that point. Just quickly picking up emergency critic hologram saying the Crownlands, or asking, the Crownlands have been largely passive in the conflicts we've seen. Do they have much power like the Reach or other regions do as a united force? If not, why did the Crownlands emerge? The Crownlands, as a concept, are only as old as the Targaryen rule is, so they don't have this history of self-identity. It's only about who their liege lord is, which is tied in with the Targaryens. Now, and I think I'm going to come onto this a bit later, but Later on in the rule of Aerys II, it is noticeable that the rebellions and things start getting closer and closer to home, and so you get the Kingswood Brotherhood rebelling. You get the Defiance at Duskendale. These are things literally within a couple of days' ride away from King's Landing itself. It's not that they're facing threats now from off in Dawn or the Iron Islands or something like that. The threats are very much against in the vicinity of the Crown Lands, and the Crown Lands themselves are turning against their own lord. So that was symbolically, that's what George R. Martin was trying to show us at that point, that the end was nigh for the Targaryens. Yeah, they can field forces. The places like Duskendale is that they are significant ports. The biggest thing though is the Royal Navy, which is there, and the Valyrian Navy. So it's more of a sort of a fleet that we've got going on, rather than an army. Question from Lady Pushkins saying, "Hi Robert, did the dragons form the obsidian at Dragonstone? Also, what is the climate like? I thought the Targaryens would have settled somewhere warmer." So the obsidian, the dragon glass, it wasn't formed by the dragons. It would appear it was there before the dragons arrived. This is another one of those ancient islands that I keep on coming back to, that the dragon glass seems to have come from. This feels like it is way more ancient than the Targaryens, but it comes the obsidian. This is frozen fire. This comes from the volcanic activity within Dragonstone, rather than the dragons themselves. As for the climate, it's it's okay, as in if you sort of try and have a look at the latitude, longitude of it, then it's what you might get in the Vale, that kind of thing, and the Vale of Arryn is very lush and verdant and produces huge amounts of food, so it's quite nice, but it is an island. It's an island in the middle of the sea, and it is storm lashed at times. There are winds blowing in, and as we've said, it's got this constant sulfuric smell from coming up from the volcanic activity under the island. So it's not for most people, they don't think of it as a pleasant place. Certainly Stannis didn't think of it as a pleasant place, but the dragons did, and that's why the Targaryens were there. Lady Eternal saying, good time zone. My father is just out of hospital, and watching this live is going to be very soothing after a stressful few days. I hope your father is well. I don't know what was wrong, but I hope he recovers fully. During Dany's first chapter in A Game of Thrones, she reminisces on the tales she's been told about the damage done to Dragonstone during the storm that occurred on the night of her birth, specifically about stone blocks being torn away by its force. However, none of the other POV characters at Dragonstone have ever mentioned the damage. And since Dragonstone is made from fused Valyrian stone, could not have been repaired after the storm, since no one knew how, this seems to contradict the tales of the damage that Dany has been fed. How do you think she will react to seeing that Dragonstone is whole and undamaged? Physical evidence that Viserys may not have told her the complete truth about her past. I think it's a really interesting set of points here. The boring answer, I suspect, is that that early Daenerys, her first Daenerys chapter, was before George R. R. Martin had completely worked up the idea of Dragonstone. So what we're seeing is the kind of throwaway remark that he might have made before he thought about all the fused stone and things like that. So I don't think we should take it too literally. However, yes, I do like the idea that because this is fused stone, Viserys may well have embellished certain elements, and Dany may well see that he embellished certain elements. But we know the storm did happen. The storm destroyed boats. This was a hugely powerful storm at the time. She was called Stormborn. This wasn't a name that Viserys gave her. This was a name that she was given. Willem Darry and people like that gave her. That was her Daenerys Stormborn because of the storm. So it was a big storm. I think the exact details, George R. R. Martin, is a little bit vague on, but yes, I like the idea that maybe she will see that perhaps Viserys didn't tell her the entire truth. She's already started to understand that he hasn't told her the entire truth. Okay, I think that is all my patrons' questions about Dragonstone. So let's move on to King's Landing. So, I mean, if you've got any more questions on Dragonstone, or just having a quick flick through Revolution. No, I've not, unfortunately, been to Belfast, Iceland, or Dubrovnik. They are on my list just as soon as we get out of this pandemic, I have to say. Andrew Kay is saying a reluctant king could make a good one. But no way that George R. R. Martin is giving us that. Yeah, absolutely, I agree. So John is not going to be the king. Fodder for foreshadowing saying it's always weirded me out that Rhaenys's hill had the dragon pit and Visenya's hill had the sept. It just seems the wrong way around for some reason. Yes, so Visenya was a lot more warlike, and Rhaenys a lot more sort of a lover of well, she was a lover and she enjoyed music and fun and frivolity. So they had very different characters. Yes, it does kind of make a bit of chain difference, I guess, but then you could argue the other way around, that Rhaenys's hill, the dragon pit is about tying down dragons rather than actually releasing them. But yeah, you can do you could argue it either way, I guess. Questions from, I think that's yeah, just having quick flick through there. So let's move on to some. Robinson saying, do you think there are more possible dragon seeds left on Dragonstone or anywhere else in the current story? Yeah, absolutely. And I think, well, I don't know whether they'd be counted as dragon seeds, but people of Valyrian descent are all over the place. You just have to go to, say, Lys, where they have those kinds of features, that there are lots all the way across the free cities of people with Valyrian heritage. Obviously, the House Velaryon is Valyrian heritage, so there are lots of people with Valyrian heritage. The dragon seeds being specifically those who are born on Dragonstone, of the Targaryens and the people who lived there, the small folk who lived there. That I don't think there will have been any in recent history, because the Targaryens haven't been there, and Aerys himself seems to have been largely based on in King's Landing for his philandering years. Rhaegar didn't really seem the sort, so I don't think there are any recently, but almost certainly there will be some people there who are have some Valyrian heritage in there. Okay, let's go to King's Landing next. So Shar says, hi Robert, I hope all is well. Tyrion spoke of 19 dragon skulls in the crypt of the Red Keep. How many of those can we actually put a name to? Well, the boring answer is I don't think we can put a name specifically to many of them. One of them is the Last Dragon, which that's the name that we appear to have as the Last Dragon. One of them appears to be Balerion, and then the rest, it's not all of the dragons. There are many more dragons that were out there. The last two, we're told, are small, like the size of a mastiff's head. These appear to be some of the dragons that were born right at the very end after the Dance of the Dragons, but it seems to be most of them. Some dragons were lost at sea, so if you sort of work out how many dragons might there be a dragon head for in King's Landing, most of the dragons that we have names for will be there. So there are a couple who just will have headed off. Like Sheepstealer is probably, Dragon Skull is probably hidden somewhere off in the Mountains of the Moon over in the Vale. No one's going to find that. We've got a few dragons which drowned in the God's Eye Lake or off in the sea, but of the rest, most of them were there, and so we can put names on them, but they didn't have little placards under them, as far as we could tell, saying this is the dragon head of whichever dragon. Diego Godoy connected to this, saying, "Hola, Robert. Hola. What do you think will happen with the dragon skulls at the end of the story? Maybe Daenerys will destroy them when she attacks King's Landing." Yeah. So, I think the short answer is I don't think they're going to have a role other than symbolic role. Now, one thing I think is entirely possible is that when Fagon arrives, takes over King's Landing, what he is doing, you see it, he's coming through, and is likely to happen in the future, is he is wanting to present himself as a Targaryen king, obviously. What do you do there? Well, he has a Targaryen crown. He sits on the Iron Throne. He will have a Kingsguard, which is reminiscent of previous Targaryen Kingsguards. He's going to almost certainly be given the sword Blackfire. These are all kind of representations of being a Targaryen king. I suspect that what he will do is Varys obviously knows that the dragon skulls are there. They were removed from there when Robert Baratheon, from the main throne room, the Great Hall, when Robert Baratheon took over. I have a feeling that he will restore them so that this is the new look that says Targaryens, dragons, we're back in town. So I have a feeling that Fagon will bring them back up into play as a symbol of Targaryen rule. The idea that Dany could destroy them, I quite like. I mean, I don't think we've got. I mean, it's not that we've not got any evidence. George R. R. Martin's not given us huge amounts of foreshadowing about this or anything, because I don't think that they are a particularly important part of this story. But yes, there will certainly be some sort of irony by Dany destroying them in whatever sort of fire does happen in King's Landing. That it works for me. Mark Keener, thank you so much for the super chat, saying, no question, just supporting the best Game of Thrones content creator out there. Thank you. I really appreciate that. Thank you for the great content, Robert. I enjoy all your Game of Thrones and Lord of the Rings content. Keep it up. Thank you very much. I do appreciate that. The Greasy Strangler saying, greetings, 7 blessings to you, 7 blessings to you too. Can you talk about the secret passages in King's Landing that Maegor the Cruel had built? Do we know of anyone exploiting them, and any ideas on how they can be used for Fagon's invasion? Thanks, the Greasy Strangler. So there are many, many passages in the Red Keep. Now, the story is that Maegor the Cruel decided that there should be lots of these little ways in and out and around the Red Keep. And so when he hired people to be building the Red Keep, once they'd finished it and he got the plans and he knew where all these things were, he threw a feast for all of these workmen and architects and all the rest of it. They had a really nice time, and then he killed them all. So he was the only person who knew any of these secrets. Now, the reality is that they've been used all through the history of the Targaryens. There, whoever happens to be Master of Whisperers or the equivalent seems to know most of them. Varys certainly knows his way around them. They found some when Cersei had the Tower of the Hand before she burnt it. She had people just hunting for any secret passages, and they did find them there. But there are many, many more. Have they been used? Yes, all the time. Just thinking in the Dark She's the assassins who came into the the Red Keep almost certainly came in that way. When Larys Strong managed to smuggle the King Aegon II out, he almost certainly managed to he almost certainly did that, used the secret passageways there. More recently, we get Varys when he was murdering Kevin Lannister. He was using the secret passageways there. That is almost certainly how he's been surviving all this time, just sort of scurrying around, keeping an eye on what's going on. They are supposed to be secret and nobody knows them except one or two people, but they come into so many different parts of this story all over the place. So yes, they're definitely there. In terms of what how they might be used for Fagon's invasion, I think that Varys has already used them to good effect to be and he gives this great speech when he kills Kevin Lannister or has him killed, and he basically says, well, look, this isn't personal, Kevin. In fact, you have my respect because you're doing a very good job, and that is why I have to get rid of you, because if Cersei left to her own devices, wouldn't be doing a great job, but you've come in and you've been competent, and because you've been competent, unfortunately, I need to kill you. It's dark, but that's how Varys operates. And so he is going to use these to undermine from within the defense of King's Landing. So when Fagon arrives, then the Red Keep, the forces within the Red Keep will not be able to defend it effectively. I suspect that they're also we're going to see Qyburn, who obviously has been figuring out his way around the Red Keep. He will manage to spirit Cersei out through there as well. The Real YT, thank you so much for the super chat. That's very generous, saying thank you for helping go through brand new onset of seizures with 2 big holes in my skull, having brain surgery to fix them, 1 month and a half hospital stay, then 2 weeks in rehab. Your voice helped me a lot. Wow, thank you. Don't really know what to say to that. It means a lot that I can help be a part of people's lives, and you obviously have my very best wishes for that. That sounds very serious, but yeah, you have my very best wishes. So thank you. Question from Lee Roberts saying, hi Robert, I hope you're all right. My question about the Red Keep. I've always been intrigued by what's underneath the black cells. While Varys helps Tyrion escape, they go through the 4th level. It's supposedly safer to go through the 4th level of the dungeons in darkness because there are things one would not wish to see. What secrets do you think are hiding down there? So there are 4 levels to the dungeons, we're told. 4 levels to the dungeons in the Red Keep. Now, the top level, well, the top 2 levels, I forget which way around they are, but one of them is for the lords and ladies who are just sort of effectively under house arrest, and it's all okay. You are in prison, but it's not all that bad. Then you sort of go down a level. Then the 3rd level down is what we call the black cells. They're called the black cells. This is where Ned was. Tyrion was there for a bit. They're called the black cells because there's no light that comes in, so it is just pitch black there. So that's the 3rd level. The 4th level, we're not told about huge amounts of details, but basically these are the torture chambers. That's what was there. That's Maegor the Cruel wanted to have torture chambers, and we read about them used at various points again during the history of the Targaryen rule. And so that is where this story seems to come from, is that it's not that there is some great gribbly monsters hidden away on the fourth level there. This is humans hurting other humans, and you do not wish to see that, because that's just horrible. So that is where that comes from. It's the idea that it's better for you not to actually see it. So it's not that they're trying to hide some great monster in the dark or some magical thing behind. That's it's just sparing people's eyes. Question from Mara Lee. Will Cersei try to blow up the Great Sept like she did on the TV show? Yes, I think so. The result of what Varys has done with murdering Kevin Lannister is that he's murdered him, and he's framed the Tyrells now. And what he says is that people will blame the Tyrells. Someone will find a way to blame the Dornish. This is just how this works. He's sowing confusion, mistrust, and hatred. And he knows Cersei very well, and he knows full well Cersei is looking for an excuse to get rid of the Tyrells. She does not like Marjorie at all. So now she has got a reason to get rid of her. She's also got a huge enemy in the High Sparrow. What's she going to do? How is she going to get rid of them? We know also that she likes wildfire. I mentioned it a moment ago when she burned the Tower of the Hand. This was, and if you read that chapter, it's really quite visceral. She feels like she's presented like the Mad King, like Aerys II, and she's there, and she stands deep into the night watching the wildfire flames, and she loves it. She just really enjoys it, and that's a nothing moment in some ways, because they've already gutted it. They've already found that there's no one there. This is just a symbolic act to burn the tower. But now she knows what it's like. Now she knows the power of it, and she seems to really like it. Jaime is scared of her. He comes, and this is where the comparison comes. He says, "You're being like Aerys II here." And he knows, because he saw that look in Aerys II's eyes when he was wanting to burn the city. And he saw that in Cersei's eyes. And that is very clear, almost heavy foreshadowing that she is going to do something else. So how does this all add up? I think the most obvious way is that Cersei is going to burn down the Great Sept, in her mind, get rid of the High Septon, get rid of Marjorie, get rid of the Tyrells. This will leave her in a position of great strength, she thinks. Of course, it's a short-term win. It's actually going to turn the people against her. It's going to turn, most of the Tyrells aren't there, so it's going to turn House Tyrell against her. It's going to turn the Faith of the Seven against her, because it's a nationwide faith, and that she's just been destroying the center of the most holy place there. So she's going to create a huge amount of enemies. So yes, I think she will, and I think that this is part of this, her becoming hated in King's Landing, and Fagon appearing like a very attractive alternative to her. Jordan Walker and Mara Lee, also, you had another question about this, saying, this is Jordan Walker saying, I usually listen to your streams the following day while doing car restoration, but I'm planning on tuning in live tonight. Well, if you are, great. Welcome, Jordan. I've heard you mention that you think Fagon will capture King's Landing before being ousted by Daenerys. Will he die inside the Red Keep or be forced to flee? How do you see his final moments playing out? This is something we've not got many hints on, but we've got one big hint, I think. So I think, yes, he will take over. when Dany is in the House of the Undying, she gets a whole series of these visions, and one of them is the mummer's dragon being held aloft among cheering crowds. This gives us the idea that actually he's going to be popular, which again makes sense. Taking over from Cersei, he seems to actually be relatively competent and charismatic, and of course, the people will like him. But also, he appears to be one of these lies that Daenerys has to expose. Now, one of these is Stannis, and another one seems to be him. Now, what does this mean? Well, how is she going to expose him as a lie? Because he is not who he says he is. And I think the only way that we're going to get to this is in some way with dragons. This is the ultimate. He has been spending all this time building up this idea of I am the great Targaryen king, I'm returned, and all the rest of it, and he's suddenly going to be faced by actual dragons. Now, it has to be said, does have Targaryen heritage. The Blackfires were an offshoot of the Targaryens, but they did intermarry quite a few times, so he is quite a few generations down, so he is not, though I don't like the word, he's not as pure in terms of his Valyrian descent as, say, Daenerys is, although even her descent is not quite as clearly Valyrian as you might think. So I think that she will expose the lie of who he is, and will show that he is a Blackfire pretender rather than actually the Targaryen, the Aegon VI. So I think that is what's going to happen. The most obvious way is to do with the dragons not taking to him. And so I think that is probably how he will die. And I think that soon after that, she will then have to turn her attention to the north. So I don't think we're going to see much by way of a follow-up to all of that. Berus Aurelius, thank you so much, saying, is there any significance to the old Highgarden coins found in the Tower of the Hand after Tyrion's escape? Cersei mentions them often. Keep crushing. Well, thank you. Yes, she does. This is one of those things that I suspect if I looked into this, all of the instances of when she remembers them, then perhaps I would start seeing a pattern. In the absence of that, I think this is actually pretty much exactly what Varys is proposing to do this time. He's going to leave behind some coins which hint at the Tyrells being involved in the death of Kevin Lannister. That's his plan, and it seems that he has got this plan from this is what happened with Tyrion's escape, because Cersei does start to try and make connections. The Highgardens, they're connected to the Tyrells. So this seems to be the sort of the foreshadowing of what is going to happen later, which is going to be of much greater significance. Cersei drawing the wrong conclusion from some coins left over at the scene of a crime. It's basically what that is about, I think. Reflective Rambling, picking up a question. Thank you, Reflective Rambling. You do this a lot, and I really appreciate it. Saying from H. Pinales 18, who is your favorite Robert? Lusty King Rob, the Young Wolf, or Robert Strong, or any other? Also, we're with Sydney Rose saying you help so many people with your presence and light. Well, thank you. I appreciate that. That's what I try and do. I hope that if you can put out a little bit of love and positivity into this universe, then that's, light. Darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only light can drive out darkness. That's something that I think is very important in this world. But thank you for that. In terms of my favorite Robert, is it Rob Stark, Robert Strong? King Robert Baratheon. I mean, I don't know if I have a favorite. I'm sure I will probably offend many people here. I always found Robb Stark a little bit earnest for my taste. He's not particularly exciting. Robert Strong is a little too zombie-like for my taste as well. So I think by a process of elimination, I have to come to Robert Baratheon. We only see him, and George R. R. Martin does this deliberately, I think, but we only see him in the latter part of his life when he is this overweight king who really doesn't enjoy what running the kingdom. But in his younger days, he was a force of nature. He was charismatic in the extreme. When you read about what happened in Robert's rebellion, yes, he sounds like an incredibly obnoxious person. You probably wouldn't want to spend huge amounts of time with him, but there's no denying the fact that he had this incredibly high risk approach to every battle he went into. This is why he got injured so many times in battles, because he would just charge into the battle, leading the fight, and hunt down the leader of the other side and then take them on himself personally. That's what he did. This is why he was fighting Rhaegar 1-on-1. He did this again and again and again in every battle he fought. And that's as I say, charismatic is probably the only word that we can come up with. People did follow him because he set a lead, and he was an astonishing character back in his day. Crouching Panther Hidden Dragon saying, I think Dany will tell Fagon to prove that he is a real Targaryen by attempting to tame a dragon. I think that's entirely possible. That might well be the way it is. I think Dany may well get the idea. George R. Martin, as we know, does do this of one thing echoing into another. She may well get the idea from what happened with Paul Quentin Martell, who tried to tame a dragon because he thought that he had some Targaryen blood in him, but it didn't quite work like that. And he did have some Targaryen blood in him. Let's not beat around the bush. He did, but it didn't work like that. And I think that, yes, Dany could well challenge him to tame and ride a dragon. Justin Thompson saying, someday I will remember to submit a Patreon question. I never make these live, so cheersing with hard seltzer from Minnesota. Well, Justin, thank you very much, and cheers back to you with my water. Question from, I think I had one more, Lady Eternal, saying, and thank you very much, Lady Eternal. Obsidian in real life is a powerful protector against negative energy and psychic attacks. Its lack of crystalline structure lets it work very fast, and it can be used to heal past life trauma and for scrying and divination. Interesting, eh? Yeah, I mean, I have to admit, I didn't know any of that about Obsidian. I do have a little bit of Dragonglass. I don't even know where it is. I found it in an odd store a couple of years ago. It was and it's a real life thing. Obsidian, it is frozen fire, volcanic rock, and it is very, very beautiful. And it's very sharp edged, and as you say, the lack of crystalline structure, it works very much. You can see how it could be an edged weapon, but a brittle one. So it's not very effective, except against something that would be magically vulnerable to it in some way. But thank you, Lady Eternal, for that information. Question from... so Lady Eternal also had a question from you, which I think I picked up largely from elsewhere, about if the caches of wildfire in King's Landing are set off, it would lay waste to the city. Where would the seat of power be afterwards? So I think the most likely place is somewhere like Harrenhal. Okay, so as I said that I would have sort of 3 chunks to this. The first chunk looking at Dragonstone, the second chunk looking at King's Landing, the third just a few odds and ends, random questions, partly about the Crown Lands, some things I picked up from previous weeks and the like. So now's a good time if you've got any questions about King's Landing to drop them there in the chat, and I'll try and pick up on them. But I always try to thank my patrons at some point in all of my live streams. Patrons, thank you so much. I say it every week, but I mean it every week. I genuinely cannot do what I do. I could not devote the time to what I do without your support. So thank you. I hugely appreciate it. That's why I prioritize my patrons' questions here on these live streams. It's a way of thanking them. There are other patron benefits if you want to check out the link down in the description to my Patreon. And I'm thinking of I will probably announce it this time next week, a new Patreon benefit for all of my patrons as a way to try and build a community of patrons and improve my ability to chat. So that's something to look forward to next time. If you are interested in being a patron, please do check out the link down in the description. The other thing I will just say, if you are somebody who subscribes to my second channel, which is called The Well Told Tale. Again, there's a link down in the description if you're interested. That is me doing audio narrations of some of the finest science fiction and fantasy stories ever written. I just love it. It's a passion project for me. I just love sharing classic science fiction and fantasy stories. And that's available both as a YouTube channel and as a podcast if you want to go hunting for that. Just a quick update there. If you have been subscribed to the channel, then you may well have noticed that it's been a little bit slow in terms of the content. The podcasts have still been coming out, but I had a few problems uploading for a few weeks. So what I'm going to do is I'm speeding up the content for a couple of weeks so that it'll be coming out twice a week on Wednesdays and Saturdays until we've caught back up with the podcast, and it'll go back to once a week. So if you're wondering what was happening with The Well Told Tale, that is what is happening over there. But let's pick up on questions. Let's see. I don't think there's anything else particularly on the on King's Landing, so I will go to my odds and ends questions. I actually quite like doing these, and I'll may well even next week we'll see just open Q&A on things. So we will move around a little bit. Something crazy, actually, just picking up here, saying, thanks as always. Why do you think Cersei hasn't renamed King's Landing to Queen's Landing? Might Dany, even when she takes it over? Good question. I think so. Cersei isn't the ruler in the books. Tommen is the ruler. So that she didn't have the authority to change it. And it's called King's Landing not because that is where the king is, but that's because where the king landed, Aegon the First. So it's a commemoration of that rather than anything else. And the Targaryens had always wanted to think of their way back to Aegon the Conqueror and show the link all the way back there. So making it Queen's Landing wouldn't really work because it's not Cersei wouldn't landing there at all. So yeah, it would just be an ego thing if she did, and I don't think Dany will do that because she will wish to retain the link back to Aegon. Okay, question from the Dominic Vaughan saying, hi Robert, could you give me your thoughts on the Kingswood Brotherhood campaign? A cool meta detail maybe, but also it intrigued me. A formative era for Sir Jaime and insights into Arthur Dane and Barristan and the intriguing Smiling Knight. He seemed like a mix of the Joker and a medieval outlaw. Also, something I was trying to figure out recently after listening to the amazing Harry Lloyd rated audiobooks of Duncan Egg. They are amazing. But couldn't get definitive confirmation on the position of the Battle of the Redgrass Field. I think it's just given as near King's Landing. Okay, so a few things there. In terms of where the Redgrass Field was, no, we're not officially told anywhere where it is. And Elio Garcia, who's as close as we have to official confirmation of things in the world of Ice and Fire, George he and Linda, his wife, they work with George R. R. Martin on works co-writing the world of Ice and Fire, and he uses them as a sort of memory on what is in the world. And Elio has confirmed it is near King's Landing, and that's the only information we have now. I think if you talk to someone like Aziz, who is, as always, a font of much great knowledge on the world of Ice and Fire, he has scoured the maps and thinks he knows exactly where it is, which is great. My personal take is that the maps in the Lands of Ice and Fire happened after the books were written, so I don't think that we can necessarily take that as gospel, but I would never wish to contradict Aziz when it comes to knowledge of what's happening in Westeros. So no, we just have the information that it was near to King's Landing, and I think we probably just accept that. Now, in terms of the Kingswood Brotherhood campaign, now this is something that happened in the recent history at the end of Aerys II. I mentioned before that as Aerys II's reign came towards an end, then the insurrections that earlier on might have come from far afield, they got closer and closer to King's Landing. The Kingswood is the wood just outside King's Landing on the way down to Storm's End. And there was a rebellion, and there was a bunch of outlaws who were in the Kingswood, and they would capture or nobles who are passing through on the King's Road. The King's Road itself does go all the way down through or from King's Landing all the way down to Storm's End. And they were very much, and if you read the description, very much like Robin Hood. They were stealing from the rich, giving to the poor, and the small folk around the Kingswood were very supportive of this band of brothers who were, known as the Kingswood Brotherhood. We get the names of some of them, and eventually the king had to do something, and so he sends out knights to go, and the Kingsguard to go and do it, and it all comes to an end when we get Arthur Dane, who gets to them, finds out where they are, because they sort of disappear somewhere into the forest every time anyone tries to find them, by actually talking to the small folk and realizing that the small folk were harboring them. They were looking after them because they sympathized and they thought that they were looking out for them. And so he listened to the small folk. He heard their grievances. He tried to make it right with them. He got a few laws changed, things like that. And eventually the small folk said, okay, we now accept, it wasn't quite this clear cut, but we now accept that maybe there are some good guys there amongst the rich and powerful in King's Landing, and the Brotherhood are over there. Then we get Arthur Dane go off. He takes them on and wins, and we get the Smiling Knight is this character who he does seem he's part of the Brotherhood, but he doesn't seem to be entirely a good character, not this noble Robin Hood kind of character. Very scary, a huge reputation that people wanted to be seen to be able to fight him and come away surviving. He's described as being a bit like the Mountain, half the size but with twice as mad, or something along the lines of that, which is what Jaime says. Jaime gets involved after this, is when he gets knighted. And this is part of what builds the reputation of Arthur Dane. Now, what role is any of this? Well, partly, as I say, this is showing that Aerys II is losing the people. He's losing grip of the land as a whole. But also, it's... you probably picked up on it just when I was explaining it. The links across to the Brotherhood Without Banners are very, very strong. The original Brotherhood Without Banners, they are there, who are on behalf of the small folk, looking out for people who otherwise would be ignored by the nobles of the land. That is the feel that we've got going on here. And so, again, George R. R. Martin is giving us something in history, which is giving us a little bit of an insight on what happens in the future. And when you get the Smiling Knight, he's an intriguing character, but he's showing us that this isn't just... I mean, it would be very easy for this to be this wonderful group of heroic bandits doing great deeds and helping the small folk. There were people in there who were not quite as noble as that. And that, I think, is George R. R. Martin, again, nodding to the fact that the Brotherhood Without Banners is not always 100% noble either. Question from Average Nerd Yenvalor saying, "Hi Robert, this is my first question as a patron. Really glad that you're getting to use one of the benefits. Huge fan of your content. I've started reading Lord of the Rings and A Song of Ice and Fire due to your content." I mean, I love it when people say this. If I can inspire people to be reading, to be taking on these excellent stories, that is a wonderful thing. I've always had some confusion concerning King's Landing and the Crown Lands. The King of the Seven Kingdoms runs them, but is there a specific group or person in charge of the Crown Lands, like in the other regions of Westeros? Does the King have unfettered authority in these lands? Does this area provide any services critical to the kingdom, or is it just a massively populated area? It is a massively populated area. It is a loose connection of ports and the woodlands and islands, and there's nothing that's there's no history that binds them together. It's just the geography of where they are and the bits that didn't previously have one king ruling over all of them. So does the king have unfettered authority? Well, yes, sort of. I mean, if you think of it in a sort of hierarchy, the way that it works in, say, the North was that obviously the king is the top in this kind of feudal system, and then you get the Lord of Winterfell, who's next and is in charge of the whole area and can then exact the king's justice. And then underneath that, there are a whole load of other noble houses. Each of the lords of those noble houses has power in their own area, but they obviously have to bow to the superior power of the Lord Stark, and so on. What effectively is happening in the Crown Lands is that you've got rid of that middle guy. You've got rid of the House Stark, Lord Paramount kind of figure, and it's just the king. So each of the lords in their area within the Crown Lands has their own authority, as they do in other parts of the Seven Kingdoms. The Celtic Guards, the Valyrians, Rosbees, and all the rest of it. They are like lords everywhere else. It's just that the lord above them is not just a random Lord Paramount, but it is the king. So that is the way that the system seems to work. And it's It's obviously an incredibly important part for the economy of the Seven Kingdoms because it has King's Landing, and also the control of the narrow sea, such as there is. That a whole area there, when you've got those islands there in the gullet, the islands, Dragonstone, Claw Island, Driftmark, they can control that part of the narrow sea and access into King's Landing. So it's a very strategically important part of the Seven Kingdoms. Canon Larson, thank you so much, saying, what do you make of Tywin's reaction to the murder of Rhaegar's children? Tywin seems surprisingly remorseful, maybe angry when discussing with Tyrion. I mean, what I make of it is I don't think Tywin particularly wanted to murder Rhaegar's children, but he thought it was needed, and that was what it is. And so I think that the discussions he has and the defensiveness he has is trying to show Tyrion in particular, but others, what lengths he would go to, but in order to achieve the ends that he wants, which is always the defense of and the strengthening of House Lannister. And his view was that was just a necessary thing that had to happen. He may not have particularly liked it, but it was a thing that had to happen. So that's what it is. Personally, I think that he's not clearly got a very strong emotional reaction to this. And indeed, he uses quite similar visceral language in talking about Tyrion and how he thought about killing him as a child, because the fact that Tyrion was, physically as he was, but also B, his birth caused the death of Joanna Lannister, the woman that Tywin loved. So I think that it's very close to home for Tywin, but everything that he does in his mind is for the good of House Lannister. Brian Real, hi there, saying, greetings, Robert. I have a theory around Tommen's demise. In Fire and Blood, Aegon III's first wife dies by apparent suicide though foul play is suspected. Could this be foreshadowing? Thank you for all the great content. Yeah, so I think you may well be exactly right there. She gets... or she dies having fallen out of a window of the Red Keep, Maegor's Holdfast, and rather gruesomely gets impaled on the stakes down in the dry moat. The rumours were that maybe she was pushed, and I think that it sounds similar to where we were at with Tommen on the show, in that, yes, we saw what happened, but certainly people could say, would think that's a thing that he might do if his wife is brutally murdered by his mother. Somebody could certainly kill him and pretend that it was suicide. So that's a thing that I think is entirely likely. And yes, the fact that George R. R. Martin has included this detail in Fire and Blood, I think, is very telling. A lot of the stuff that we've got in Fire and Blood is definitely him laying the framework, the foundation for the kind of things we're going to be seeing in the last two books of Song of Ice and Fire. So yeah, I think I like it. I think it's a really good theory. Lady Eternal saying, the red wines are further mystery in that their allegiance, this is the House Red Wine of the Arbor down in the Reach. Their allegiances during the Blackfire rebellions has never been stated or alluded to. Viserys named the red wines as a loyal house in A Game of Thrones. but that's all we have. And the Red Wine fleet was moved just prior to the landing of Aegon's forces, in what seemed like timing too coincidental to be chance. Is it possible that the Red Wines are or will align themselves with Aegon cause? And how will that affect the balance of power in the Winds of Winter? I think that the main point here is that the Red Wines are very, very closely aligned with the Tyrells. Lord Redwine is married to Mace Tyrell's sister, and Elena Tyrell is actually Elena Redwine. She was a Redwine before she married into the Tyrells, so they are very, very close. So they will go with where the Tyrells go. And the Tyrells will almost certainly turn against Cersei and the Lannisters when Cersei kills Marjorie, as she surely will. Who will they turn to? Well, I think Aegon. I think that's where they're going to end up. So, but the fact is that the Red Wine fleet is almost certainly going to be decimated to a greater or lesser extent by Euron off the south coast. He is waiting for them. He is waiting for the fleet to arrive, and this is who he's going to be facing when this battle that we think about so much, that we know that he's preparing for, that he's strapping all of these magic users and priests and the rest of it onto the front of his ships. This is all in preparation for a battle. The Red Wine fleet are going to be involved. A lot of them will be destroyed. Another question about how, this is from the Stormlands live stream I did last week. How did the Weeping Town get its name? It got its name, and it's not a place we hear huge amounts about, but it's a port in the Stormlands, and I think it's probably their main port, actually, because obviously Storm's End is not in Shipbreaker Bay. It's given a name for a reason. It's not the place where you actually have a decent port. Weeping Town is known by the name it is because Daeron the First Targaryen, who invaded Dorne back in the day, he succeeded Aegon the Third, so just a bit after the Where Fire and Blood ended. We will get next time, if we ever get that far, we will get to Daeron the First, who invades Dorne, and lots of people are lost in the invasion of Dorne. Many, many more are lost in trying to keep Dorne, and eventually he is killed in this process, and his body is returned, and it is when it comes back from Dorne into the Seven Kingdoms, it goes to what became known as Weeping Town, because people cried because they saw their king's dead body. So that was why it was called Weeping Town. Tyler Evan, thank you so much for the super chat, saying hello, started watching the live streams lately, very good, I'm glad you're enjoying them. Do you think Claw Isle will come into play on the story with the Kraken Horn? Possibly. So this was one of the things, it's mentioned in passing, I think Salador San and Davos discussed this, that allegedly Claw Isle, which is where House Celtigar are based, has huge amounts of riches there, including the Kraken Horn. And this kind of links across to, we've got two horns that we know are going to be important, the Horn of Winter and Dragonbinder, the Hellhorn. Will the Kraken Horn become important? It might. I don't think it's going to be as important as the other two. The point about Krakens is that they are summoned by blood in the water. they may well be magical creatures, but everything we've seen, again, this was foreshadowed in Fire and Blood, that they appear when there is blood in the water, and so they will appear after Euron's battle, almost certainly, because of the huge amounts of people who are going to be dying there. I don't think he will need a specific horn in order to be doing that. So possibly, but I don't think it's going to be central to the story. Sydney Rose saying, hello, Robert. Hi there, Sydney, saying nothing but lightning and stormy weather in Florida today, the stormlands of the US. So I recently revisited your Bloodraven series, and I'm trying to wrap my head around how Bloodraven thought it was a better idea to manipulate his family through magic rather than explaining to his family members, several who he had originally been on good terms with when they all gathered for the Great Council of 233. He could have used the event to reveal the potential threat that was brewing. Are his goals as the Three-Eyed Raven truly even his own anymore, since he's connected to the Weirwood network, which is sentient to an extent? Right. Hashtag the trees are alive. The trees are alive. Actually, that's what I comment. I used that when I said that the trees seem almost alive in a video I did ages ago about the Weirwoods, and many people in the comments pointed out that, of course, the trees are alive, which wasn't quite what I was meaning. But let's get back to Bloodraven. So Bloodraven, for those who haven't watched those videos of mine, Bloodraven, it would appear after, this is a while after the Dance of the Dragons and leading up to the end of the Targaryen rule. He seems to have been proactively involved in what can only be called the pruning of the Targaryen line. He went out of his way and personally killed at least half a dozen Targaryens, or they might not have had the name Targaryen, but Blackfires, who were effectively an offshoot of the Targaryens. He went, there were Targaryens who had all manner of laughable deaths that seem almost too coincidental or to be true. Then you get all of these. We don't see them all, but they're in the background too. If you read Dunk and Egg, and we know that Aegon the Fifth was Aegon the Unlikely because nobody thought that he would ever become king because he was so far down the line of succession. And that's what happened, is that from the time that he was a boy to the time that he became a man, all of the people between him and the throne died or abdicated or something. And so he has been manipulating the Targaryen family tree. The question is, why didn't he just sit them all down and say, okay, guys, so I think there's this threat. I think we need to get the bloodlines right in order to get the prince that was promised, etc., etc., etc. Well, I think there are a couple of things. Firstly, I don't think that he knew all of the detail of that at the time. This was before he was hooked up to the Weirwood network. Yes, he was magical, but I don't think he knew all of the details of it. And secondly, I don't think he trusted anyone enough to let them into the plan. And thirdly, I don't think the Targaryens would have gone for it. We see that the Targaryens, they're very strong-willed and they married who they wanted to. And that was another part of the problem, was that Aegon V's children, he wanted them all to be marrying politically outside of the Targaryens, but they didn't, because of what appears to be outside influence. So there's a few good reasons, but he just did not trust people, and probably rightly. Doesn't justify what he did, but I don't think that he could have talked them into it. Tyler Evan saying, do you think the cannibal is dead? The cannibal being a dragon on Dragonstone that we read about in Fire and Blood. Yes, the cannibal was very old. We don't know how old, there were I mean, it says in Fire and Blood, some people think that maybe cannibal was even there before the Targaryens arrived. That's how old it was. We just don't hear anything else from it, and the fact that nobody wanted to approach the cave that cannibal was in, but it just goes silent for a long time, and so the clear implication is that cannibal was dead. When we get to the last dragon, in order for the last dragon to be called the last dragon, I think they need to be pretty clear that the other dragons are dead, and so I think that as and when we get Fire and Blood Part 2, we will see that they go and check and do find out that cannibal is indeed dead. So yes, we would have heard of cannibal if cannibal were still alive. Michael James, thank you so much for the super sticker. Question from Catherine Fursith, saying, "Hi Robert, since today's live stream is in the Crownlands, I hope you don't mind talking a little bit about the Defiance of Duskendale. It's a rebellion that in some ways doesn't make sense and brought about the downfall or rather extinction of two houses, House Darklyn, which was ancient, and House Hollard. Do you buy the notion that Lady Serala was singularly to blame, or was there another story? How does the Defiance of Duskendale play into the story of A Song of Ice and Fire?" Well, I think there are a few elements to this. One of them is the thing that I've talked about already, which is that this was George R. R. Martin showing that rebellion and opposition to Aerys II was getting closer and closer and closer to King's Landing. Duskendale is just down the coast. Secondly, it creates the right trigger for his descent from being, he never seems to have been completely sane, so to speak, but this triggers the move to the position where people could start talking about him as being the Mad King. He certainly became very paranoid from that moment on. So that was the plot point of what was going on there. In terms of in-world, do I buy that this was all Lady Serala? So basically the story, for those who are unaware, it was just it was a trade dispute, basically. Lord Duskendale was wanting, because Duskendale had been the main port in that area, and then King's Landing came and took all of their trade, and he just wanted to have control and wanted tariffs lifted and things like that, and he wanted to pitch his ideas to the king personally. The king went there and he got kidnapped and was locked in their prison for 6 months, and there was this huge debate. What do the king's forces do? They can surround the castle, but if they attack, then they're running the risk that the king would be killed. And eventually he only gets out because Barristan the Bold, this is part of the making of the legend, Sir Barristan does a single-handed mission. He goes in ninja style, as far as we can tell, makes his way down on his own into the dungeon, rescues the king, brings him out, takes on anyone who gets in the way, and saves the king's life. Now, what the rumors were, according to the World of Ice and Fire, which means according to the Maesters, well, this was all the wicked Lady Serala, who was from, I can't remember exactly which of the Free Cities, but she was a foreign woman who had married into the Darklyn family, and it was her who was stirring up all of the trouble. I think we can happily ignore that. This is something that the Maesters always seem to do. George R. R. Martin gives us this time and time again. If there's a woman, particularly a foreign woman, who is in any way involved in things, then the Maesters seem to think that she's a witch. She's doing some horrible, have some horrible control over men, and it's just all terrible and all her fault. This is it's pretty standard for what the Maesters say, so I don't think we need to give that huge amounts of credence. I think that is entirely possible. Yes, you can come up with some great conspiracy theories about perhaps there are those like Tywin, who might have welcomed there being a change in the guard, the old king going, a new king coming in. But I think the plain text story we have of just a reasonably powerful lord local to King's Landing, local to the king, who just gets ahead of themselves and thinks that they can get away with what is effectively complete open rebellion. This shows the extent to which the power of the Targaryens had fallen. It's the same kind of thing that happened over in when we talk about House Reign. They did the things that they did because of it showed the extent to which at the time House Lannister had fallen, and this is showing the extent to which House Targaryen had fallen, that lords locally felt that they could kidnap a king and get away with it. That is what we're being shown through this story. Mara Lee saying, what happened to cause the War of the Ninepenny Kings? This was effectively, this was the fifth Blackfire Rebellion. Now, it didn't really ever get started. There was this group called the Group of Nine, the Band of Nine, who were based over in Essos, and it was these 9 lords and merchants and chancers who banded together, and they said, well, we all want to be kings of various places. Why don't we agree to support each other, and we'll help each other to capture 9 different places that we can, so we can all be kings of somewhere. And so they went about this, and they captured Tyrosh and parts of the disputed lands, and then it was the turn for the last Blackfire male Blackfire heir, who is this guy called Maelys Blackfire, or Maelys the Monstrous, he was sometimes called. He had apparently he had a second head which was just there, and they got as far as the Stepstones, and then they got defeated, and it was a short but bloody war. That's what it was. It was an attempt. It was the last Blackfire rebellion, effectively. Question from Aitkins8. Chris, what is the relevance of the giant turtle that Tyrion sees on his boat journey? Does this symbolize anything? Sorry if not relevant. Love all your content. Keep it up. Well, thank you very much. So Tyrion is coming down the River Royne. This is when what I think you're talking about, and he's there. He's coming down the River Royne with the party of Fagon, young Griff and co at the time, and he sees a giant turtle. Now, the giant turtle is a representative of the river god, Mother Royne. So what that is and that whole part of the story, incidentally, Tyrion, Neil, and George R. R. Martin had a whole chapter in the Sorrows that he's decided not to publish. He took it out of the story, where Tyrion goes on. It goes on sort of effectively a magical adventure, meets the Shrouded Lord apparently, and things like that. So this bit is sort of echoing that, where Tyrion, who has been always this very factual, cynical person, no great thinking about magical stuff, that journey he has down the Royne, his mind starts to be opened to certain things. Even George R. R. Martin left in things which happened in the Sorrows, which were still quite freaky. There were the stone men, there was the boat which mysteriously seemed to move. Then we get the Roynar, the giant turtle, representative of another religion. There's the talk of the dragons. All of this is him moving from this place of low fantasy where he's cynical about all kinds of magic, and moving into a place where he can embrace what is now going to be a very high fantasy world of actual dragons flying in the skies above. So that is what is his journey is a personal journey as much as anything else. Cloaked One saying, for Ryan Tierney, thank you very much for picking that one up. Do you think there will be a discrepancy between who destroys King's Landing and who gets blamed? How do you think it may affect the narrative? Love your insights. Thank you. So is there going to be a difference between who destroys King's Landing and who gets blamed for it? Possibly. So I think Dany will be involved in this, but I think that the wildfire caches across King's Landing will be also involved in this. So dragonfire and wildfire caches do not work well together. And so I think that, yes, people above the skies on a dragon, but the wildfire is going to be blamed on Cersei, definitely. I don't think there's any doubt about that at all. So yes, there might be a bit of a discrepancy going on there between the two things, but I don't think there's any doubt in my mind that this is going to be a part of Dany's darker turn. And I say that, and I know that some members of the community of Song of Ice and Fire don't like this, but this is what George R. Martin has told us. She is going to take a darker turn, so we have to take him at his word that is what is going to happen, and that certainly seems to be what's been built up towards the end of A Dance with Dragons. So she will be more about fire and blood when we get to that point. Mara Lee, thank you. That incredibly generous, Mara. Thank you so much for that super sticker. That is very kind. You know how much I appreciate your support. Thank you so much. I think there was also Austin Flowers saying turtles are moon representative as they have the lunar calendar printed on their shells. In mythology, turtles are believed to have carried the world on their shell. See the never-ending story. And Mitchellania saying sea turtles especially are representatives of wisdom and longevity. Is Tyrion going to last the game? Quite possibly, yes. So I think that there's really interesting insights. Thank you so much in the chat. I always say this. There are so many clever people in the chat who know so much more than I do about a wide variety of things. Aikins 8, thank you again, saying thank you for your insight and explanation of this series. Would you ever write your own book? I think you have the intelligence and talent to do it. Going to bed now. Take care. Good night. And thank you. That's very kind. Would I write a book? Yes, I would. Absolutely. I don't know. At the moment, I don't have time. But yeah, I'll never say never. I will at some point. Maybe I will. Keep your ears out. I will let you know if I ever do get around to it. There are plenty of excellent authors, incidentally, in this fandom. We have I'm just trying to think. So Chris Smokescreen, incidentally, is about to launch his debut novel if you're a fan of Smokescreen and his work, so do keep an eye out for that. And Hello Future Me also, as I'm sure you're aware, writes. If you've not come across Hello Future Me, do go and check him out. He does some fantastic Lord of the Rings stuff, as well as many other things. He is also a writer. And there are many more writers out there. Let's go to question from Johnny Giantsbane. Greetings from the lands of always winter. One character I've always found interesting is Taena Merryweather. She quickly gains the trust of Cersei, and by the end of A Feast for Crows is her closest friend and confidant. Do you think she has a higher allegiance to anyone and was planted in court to spy on and influence Cersei? My thoughts may be Varys or Littlefinger. enjoying working my way through the Traveller's Guides this week on Patreon. Good one. I'm glad you're enjoying. That's one of the benefits of being a patron. All of the audio that I record is made available to my patrons. So if you find that useful, if you find that interesting, do go and check that out. As for Taina Merryweather, yeah, she's a character I want to look into a bit more because she does come across as quite mysterious. She's a book-only character for those who haven't read the books. She appears in court, works her way into Cersei's trust and her bed, and then sort of vanishes when Cersei starts to get into trouble with the High Sparrow. And people wonder, what is there a point to her character? Was she there? Might she be a spy? She might be. I've heard people argue that maybe this is the Dornish spy. It's possible. The name certainly doesn't scream most of the Seven Kingdoms. It could certainly sound quite Dornish. I don't think she's working for the Tyrells. Her actions in sort of running away again do seem to imply that perhaps the plain text reading might be the right one, by which I mean maybe she is just a social climber who saw an opportunity to gain in the world and influence through Cersei, the same way incidentally someone like Qyburn has, and did that, and then the moment that she just thought, you know what, I'm in over my head, she escapes away. That's entirely possible, and is probably, I know it's boring, it's probably the most likely solution. Not everyone has to have an ulterior motive or be a spy or be someone else secretly. There are some people who are just who they present themselves as. So, and George R. R. Martin knows that. He's not. He has a lot of one character being secretly another character and all the rest of it, but he does have characters who are just who they are. For example, Bronn. I know lots of people who would come up with theories about Bronn is this person or that, but Bronn is just Bronn. He's just a character who was a sellsword and happened to be in the right place at the right time. Question from this is something that came up, I think it was last time when we were looking at Robert Baratheon's tapestries, and the question was, I didn't note down the exact question, but what is it that Littlefinger wants with Robert Baratheon's tapestries? Now this is quite a detailed question, because they are mentioned, the tapestries are mentioned a few times as Robert Baratheon. He got rid of those dragon skulls and he put his own hunting tapestries up in the Great Hall, and then obviously after he's gone, Cersei is happy to get rid of them, and Littlefinger writes to her and says, begs her, can he have these hunting tapestries? Then a bit later, he mentions to Sansa, she's talking about Cersei, and he says something like, but at least she's given me these tapestries I asked her for, and there's like a smirk, and you go, well, hang on a moment, why is he smirking? What is it? He never does these things just by accident. What is it that he's up to? And then finally, in the Elaine Sansa pre-release chapter from the Winds of Winter, we see that they have arrived, and he's given them to Nestor Royce, who is happily showing them off. So, what's going on? Why does Littlefinger want these tapestries? What's the whole point? Well, I think there are a couple of things going on here. One of them is these are actually I mean, it sounds like quite a naff thing, but these will be hugely impressive. The Great Hall is massive, and for a tapestry to be on the walls there, they will, and fit for a king, they will have to be huge and impressive, and very valuable, and the kind of thing that you would show off luxurious. The fact that when Littlefinger got them, he immediately gave them to Nestor Royce, who evidently likes them, goes to the first conclusion that we can draw, is that this is just a bribe. It's a gift. He's getting Nestor Royce on side. He's giving him a nice thing. So that, I think, is the first thing, is that Nestor Royce, he's a very influential lord in the Vale, and Littlefinger has not only given him a new title, but he's also given him some incredibly nice tapestries, rich things that he can show off to people. And so he is now going to be on Team Littlefinger, or at least that's what Littlefinger wants. So that's the first thing. The second thing, this reminds me of, and we've had this a few times actually, just on this live stream, the way that George R. R. Martin, he has a small incident, a sort of an almost throwaway thing, that is very similar to something that happens later on that's slightly more important. And we get an incident of House Darry, I think it is, where they discover, after the Lannisters have taken it, they discovered that actually they've got hidden away some tapestries from the Blackfires. So secretly they had been remaining Blackfire loyalists all this time. Now, what importance does that have? Why does that need to be mentioned for a house that's now pretty much dead? Well, it shows that tapestries can show the allegiance of a house. Now, what does the house allegiance, what could that possibly mean in this role? This is Littlefinger wanting the Vale to be showing support for House Baratheon. Now, Robert Baratheon was known in the Vale. He was fostered there. He's got a daughter there as well, and so this is showing support for House Baratheon. Now, why might that be important? Well, we have another Baratheon still around who thinks that he is the heir to the throne because his brother died, Stannis. So what's happening? Littlefinger here is starting to subtly cast the Vale into the idea of them supporting Stannis. Why? Well, he wants to take the north. He is going to take Sansa to the north, and he wants to capture it. And the north at the moment is, or will, when Stannis wins, as I suspect he will be nominally accepting the kingship of Stannis, and so this is his way in. He is trying to make the links across. It's Littlefinger again. He's always got 1,000,001 plans, but his main plan is always something to do with just to create a bit of a stir, see what happens, and that is exactly what he's doing here. He's creating a little bit of a stir, creating some chaos, and he's going to try and maximize whatever else comes. Oh, Aikens8 saying, just joined Patreon. Your content gets to me through the night shift. Thank you so much and welcome. Question from, I've got 3 or 4 more questions to go. Eric Fogg. When Daenerys uses the Ironborn fleet to go to Dragonstone, will the rank and file Iron Men be operating the boats? Assuming she fries Victarion, will the Iron Men under him willingly follow her? Yes, so the underlying assumptions to this, I absolutely agree with. So, what you had on the show was you had Theon and Yara, who headed over with a whole load of boats that they magically built in a matter of one episode, as far as we could all tell. They go over to Slavers Bay, and Dany uses those boats to take her forces back. That's not going to happen in the books, but we have got the Iron Fleet headed over there. Victarion's brought them over there, and those are the boats, I feel sure. And even all the way through the story, she's always looking for the boats to take her to Westeros, and then suddenly we have the boats arriving. The question is, will the sailors in those boats be sailing them, or are they all going to live and die by Victarion? Well, I think a lot of the people who are rowing them may well be thralls to start with. They are slaves, by another word. And this, we know what Daenerys does. She frees slaves, so they may willingly now be supporting her. As for the rest of the Ironborn, if they survive, I suspect that they probably will. I mean, she will probably give them the same options that she's going to give lots of people. You either bend the knee or I kill you. And it may well be that some of them just bend the knee because she's shown herself her strength. And that's the way the Ironborn culture works. If somebody shows their strength, then you follow them. So, question from Londuck20 saying, "Hi, Robert. I can't tell you how much I enjoy these live streams every week. I'm really pleased. I listen to them on my back porch in sunny Florida with my 2 pups while drinking a glass or 3 or 4 of Arbor Gold. Sounds delightful. My question is, do you think we will ever see Dunk confess to Egg that he's not actually a knight? Or do you think he will keep this to himself until his death at Summerhall? And if he was to tell Egg before the tragedy, do you think Egg will have him knighted?" Okay, so this comes back to the fact that in the Dunk and Egg stories, Dunk almost certainly actually isn't a knight. He's just faking it to start with. Now, this, I did a video on this ages ago, probably a couple of years ago. It's one of the things that when you read the story the first time through, you probably don't pick up on it. But when you read it the second time, it's hard not to see all the clues, because he starts out trying to work out what is it that he's going to do. He's decided his master, the knight, Sir Arlen, has died, and he's trying to figure out, what am I going to do next? And he's not thinking of knightly options, and then he suddenly gets an idea, and next thing we know, he's coming along and being a knight. However, when asked to do knightly things only a knight can do, like knight someone else, he seems to go, no, all right, no, I can't do that, sorry. So all the hints are that he actually isn't a proper knight. I think the time will come when he is made a member of the Kingsguard, because at that point the Kingsguard are best knights in the land. And although we've got examples of people who aren't technically knights, like Sandor, who are members of the Kingsguard, I think we need to think that Dunk, his conscience will be going really bad and haywire if he is made Lord Commander of the Kingsguard, Knight Commander, and he's not actually a knight. So I think, yes, I think he will. I think that he will be, and I don't know that George R. R. Martin's even thought about it yet, but he will find an appropriate way for him to be knighted, in the same way that on the show, and everyone I'm sure agrees, it just felt right that Brienne was knighted when she was by Jaime. I think that it will probably be by a character who perhaps we haven't met yet, but it will become very obvious that it's right for that person to knight him. Eric Ferg saying, will we learn more about Varys's past and lineage, particularly as it relates to why the sorcerer chose him to use in the ritual? Will he ever grow out his hair like Egg will eventually do in the Dunk stories? I don't think he will ever grow out his hair. Will we learn more about his backstory? I mean, my instinct is no. I think that George R. R. Martin... The point about the backstory, Varys's backstory, is what that made him as a person. And I don't just mean physically there. I mean as a character. Where does he go from that? The actual point about what that sorcerer was trying to do and why and how, that's actually secondary. I don't think that's it. It sounds very mysterious and all the rest of it, but the fact that he stayed alive because of his visceral hatred of this sorcerer, and how this has come across to his apparent understanding of how it's the weak, the small folk who suffer the most through all of these things. Those are the important points that come from Varys's backstory. And I think that if we discover who the sorcerer is or what the sorcerer was doing, I mean, we've already seen the sorcerer, but if we get more information on that, I don't think that actually helps us understand him any better. And I don't think that George R. R. Martin will tie those bits of string together so tightly that that's actually a critical part of the main plot, what was going on there. So I suspect we're not actually going to get any more from that. Reflective Rambling, thank you very much for picking up. Mike Hall, the Ironborn had 2 Driftwood kings that wore crowns, but have only one throne from packed in Driftmark. Is there a connection? And a shout-out reminder for Tolkien Reading Day. Yes, so Tolkien Reading Day is coming up soon. And I did say I'd do a video for this, and I've not done a video yet for this. So thank you for the reminder. I will try and do that. In terms of the Driftmark and the Driftwood kings wearing crowns, I don't think there's a connection. I will take this as one of those things where I will have a think about it, and if I come up with something, then I will definitely come back next week with a bit more. But I think Driftmark, which is the island that the Valyrians are on, is a separate thing to the Iron Islanders, thematically as much as anything else. Yes, they're both islands, and there is worship of sea gods in different ways. You get the drowned gods with the Ironborn, and there's very much this the Merlin King and all the rest of it idea going off in the narrow sea. But I think that this is George R. R. Martin just showing us that sometimes there can be coincidences with these things. There's driftwood talk in the Quiet Isle, so there's lots of these different kind of elements that happen around the place. I don't think he's trying to show us anything in particular, but as I say, I'll have a think about that. If anything does spring to mind over the next week, then I will definitely come back to it and let you know in the next week's live stream. And 2 more questions from my patrons, so this is a good time to drop any more questions in the chat. Actually, just the one question. Kai Johnson. Hi, Robert. Have you considered doing videos on other fantasy sagas such as The Inheritance Cycle by Christopher Paolini, The Chronicles of Narnia by C.S. Lewis, or Harry Potter? I was wondering, out of interest, of what the bar is for future videos. If there was something you would like to do, what factors would prevent you from doing it? And also, if you had to choose between The Lord of the Rings and A Song of Ice and Fire, which do you like best? Much like I'm never going to be able to answer that second one, I'm afraid. I love them both far too much. In terms of other things, yeah, so this year, what I will be focusing on is The Lord of the Rings, Song of Ice and Fire, The Witcher, and possibly Wheel of Time. I will have to see whether I like the look of the TV show when it comes out. Beyond that, might I cover other things? Yes, I might cover other things. I'm not going to say I definitely won't. What I tend works quite well for what I offer is a TV series that is connected to books. So this is obviously A Song of Ice and Fire and Game of Thrones. The Witcher matches up with that as well. Lord of the Rings, we've got what I find with Lord of the Rings is that people tend to have an understanding of the story, a lot of it from the movies, which are a little bit different to the books. Some people have read one or two of the books. Very few people actually have read Silmarillion or Book of Unfinished Tales or anything like that. So that, I feel, is where I can add a little bit, particularly where the TV show is going to be coming in. Would I cover any of those things? I've not read The Inheritance Cycle by Christopher Paolini, so I can't really comment on that one. Chronicles of Narnia, the rights have been bought. Incidentally, the rights have been bought by Netflix for that, and they announced this was a couple of years ago, I think. And they announced that they would be producing a universe of content, I think was the word that they used. Films and TV shows, and it's gone completely quiet, and we've heard nothing since. I would be open to doing Narnia. Obviously, I've read all the books. As for Harry Potter, I think probably not. I've read the books and seen the films and all the rest of it. I think that there are plenty of others out there who can do a better job on Harry Potter than I could. So I think that's probably not the most helpful answer of what it is. What I would do, I'm in the world of, if something captures my imagination, if I think that I can add some value in terms of what I produce, then that's the kind of thing I will be looking at. I love well-written, hugely detailed fantasy stories. I also love science fiction stuff and quite a few other types of genres as well. But that's the kind of thing that really works for me, which is where I get this Song of Ice and Fire, Lord of the Rings, The Witcher, things like that. So yes, other things quite possibly. I will happily take recommendations, and I will happily consider doing other things. And I should have done this at the top of the show, actually, rather than right at the end. But my general feel is that next year is going to be an amazing year for fantasy TV shows, and I think we're going to get The Lord of the Rings, we're going to get House of the Dragon, we're probably going to get another series of The Witcher, maybe Wheel of Time, who knows, maybe even George R. R. Martin will write The Winds of Winter for then. I think it's going to be an amazing year. I think that is going to keep me very busy, just covering the things that I already cover. So not in the foreseeable future, I'm not looking to expand out, but at some point, maybe. Akins 8, who pushed Queen Helena out of the window? I genuinely don't know. It could have been Larys Strong, who is an incredibly shifty character. and it could have been a number of different people. It could have just been a suicide. That's the thing, is that it might be. The Fire and Blood, they do name a few possible suspects as well. I would have to go back and see who it's there, but I wouldn't believe who they name as suspects. Mara Lee saying, do you see Sir Dunk getting knighted in future books of the Dunk and Egg series? Thank you, Mara. Yeah, as I was saying a moment ago, I think it's entirely possible that he's not going to get knighted if he doesn't admit the fact that he's not a knight. If he admits it, and I think that the only thing that would now prompt him to would be something like being made a member of the Kingsguard. At that point, I could definitely see him being knighted, but in secret. I think that Egg would allow him that it's not a thing that the world knows that he wasn't a knight all this time. I think it would just be something that would be done in a secret ceremony for them. Maybe even Egg himself might be officially knighted at that point, and Egg can do the knighting himself. Just quickly picking up on a few things in the chat. Reflective Rambling saying, what about Dragonstone indicates magical construction? Gargoyles and circular nature can't be enough. Also, does Dan have a birthday? And you say Bobby B because you want a Warhammer. Warhammers are cool. Dan does have a birthday, which is on Hobbit Day, and Bilbo's birthday. And what about Dragonstone indicates magical construction? Yeah, it's the gargoyle. It didn't come across very well on the TV show, but it's made out of fused black stone in the way that the Valyrians knew how to do with dragons, creating a castle that looks like dragons. It doesn't look like a traditional castle. It looks like dragons. It's got dragon feet with claws just everywhere. They're holding the sconces for the torches. You get arches with dragon tails. Everything, and you climb the steps. You're climbing up scales of a dragon. The whole thing is like a dragon. It's not just an interesting castle with a few gargoyles. The whole thing feels like a castle. Mattia Dominique saying, totally off topic. That's fine. We've been moving off topic for a little bit now, but I've been wondering, the seasons play a huge role in Westeros, but as soon as we're in Essos, it seems to me that the seasons don't matter. It's always warm there. Well, it's not. It depends. Essos is huge, so the climate is very different at the top of it as to the bottom of it, and so yes, we see a lot of the warmer parts. If you go all the way up to sort of the Norvos and Ib, places like that, then it is very cold at the north, and the seasons do have an impact over in Essos. This is not just a Westerosi seasonal thing. This is the entire planet which is affected by it. So it does have an impact, but because a lot, particularly where the cities are, they're a lot more southerly than most of Westeros, then you don't see as big a shift. It's not like in the north where everything shuts down because the snow is just too great. So it's partly the bits that we've seen, and it's partly where the people live. And Mike Hall saying Bravos is cold and wet. Yeah, absolutely. Bravos being in the sort of the northwest corner of Essos. Andrew K saying, are you using new editing software on your non-live videos? Looking a bit different and really good lately. Thank you. I'm glad you've noticed. I've been upgrading the quality, I think, of what I've been able to achieve there, and I will admit it's not all my doing. I'm now thankfully able to get somebody to help me out with that side of things, not a strength of mine. Bearus Aurelia saying, do you have any long form videos in the pipe for Lord of the Rings Song of Ice and Fire? Depends what you mean by long form. What I've got planned for Lord of the Rings, I'm going to carry on doing the Lord of the Rings videos I have been doing, which is the 10-15 minute explanations of various things. I did one a while ago, but I will do a few more, I think, of discussions with various content creators and experts in the world and the legendarium of Tolkien. I find that they don't get as many views, unfortunately, as some of the other videos, but I really enjoy doing them, just getting somebody who's an expert on something and actually just talking through a subject, which works really well for me. So there will be a few of them coming along, and possibly some live streams. We'll see where we go with that. Okay, so I think with that, Robinson saying, I lagged out for a bit, but Robert hasn't talked about the new shows being development, has he? Only very briefly, I would say. Next week, I will give a full update on where we are at with it all. But the first of the shows that I'm covering, the first one we're going to see is Witcher Season 2, I suspect. They're almost full through that, filming that. Okay, one last question. Robin Graves Altoon, thank you very much, saying, just some gratitude for all the well thought out and articulated content. I love to listen while working on art projects. Oh, excellent. I love the idea that perhaps this provides the soundtrack for some art. That's very pleasing for me. Okay, next week I will either do an open Q&A or perhaps we will go across to somewhere like Bravos and look in an area like that. But if you are interested at all in watching more of these kinds of live streams, there will be a link appearing somewhere up here if you're not watching live. And if you're at all interested in supporting the channel or getting access to some of the exclusive benefits, there is a link appearing around here to my Patreon page. Okay, that's it, everyone. Thank you very much. Some fantastic questions this time. I will see you again at the same time next week. Bye now.